I'm always, it's always wonderful for me to meet my fans, always, wherever. But there's something extra special about being here in Enugu and seeing all of these young people and just the enthusiasm, the warmth, the joy. It just made me so happy, filled my heart,
Mm.
filled my heart.
Thank you. Let's talk about how you started this journey, because yesterday I listened keenly during the conversation with Odeloa. You described Things Fall Apart as one of those books that gave you an opportunity to take a chance.
Yes.
So just help us put it in perspective.
Well, because I think like most of us, when I was young, I started out by reading books that are not set in Nigeria. I think most of the books we read are books that don't reflect our own worlds to us. And so as a child, when I started writing, I was writing books about white people. And I was living in Osaka at the time. And then I started reading African books. And Chinu Achebe was one of the most important for me because and of course it wasn't contemporary. So it wasn't really my world, but it was my world in the past. But it gave me permission. Suddenly I thought, our worlds are worthy of literature. I don't have to write. I don't have to copy the English and American books I'm reading. I can write my own story. So that's why I say often that Chinu Achebe gave me permission. He gave me permission to tell my own stories. Yes.
So what draws you to exploring themes such as identity, culture, and even feminism in your work?
Because they're interesting.
How interesting?
Very interesting. But I think that a lot of literature is in fact about identity. I think sometimes when you're a person writing about situations or people who are not considered the mainstream. So in other words, when you're a Black woman writing about Black women's lives, suddenly you're writing about identity. But actually not necessarily. I think it's because it's not the subject of Black women, for example, isn't one that is necessarily, isn't one that many people have seen. So because it's not considered mainstream, we start to attach labels to it. Because when you look at a lot of literature, it's all about identity. But feminism is because I'm a woman. I am a woman who believes that women are equally human. And for me, feminism is really a belief in a justice movement, which is to say that throughout human history, women have been excluded, oppressed in all the cultures in the world simply because they were female. And I think it's time for us to address that injustice in the same way that I feel strongly really about any kind of injustice.
So I would like to know how you balance issues around personal experience or experiences with fictional storytelling in your novels. Very important. I'm sure you've got some of those questions yesterday.
So people always assume that when you write fiction that you're writing about yourself. And in a sense, you are. Right? Because I think there is me in every character I write, whether male or female. There's something of me in there. But in general, I don't write directly about my life because my life is just okay. It's not that interesting. I'm a very keen observer. So my goal as a storyteller is to watch the world. I'm watching everything. I'm learning. I'm asking questions. And then I use all of that in my work. So if I met you, Alex, for example, I've already, in 2 seconds, I've noticed everything about you. I can imagine your life. I can imagine your family life. I can imagine, and then when I'm writing, all of that comes in. And you would read it and you might not even know that you were the starting point for that character.
Mm. So I want to dig deep a little more. Can you discuss your writing process? There are people who, just like that little 11-year-old that met you yesterday and was wondering why they wouldn't accept our manuscript. What's the writing process, and do you have any specific influence that shape your style?
Well, we should say something about that lovely young girl who was 11 and who yesterday asked about her manuscript and how she had been writing, and people had been telling her she should change things. And of course, what I said to her was, don't change anything. She's very young, she's 11, but this is how one starts. When I was 11, I was writing. And my mother would buy me extra exercise books and I would write stories in them. My writing process is one that when I'm actually into the process, it's very obsessive. It's all I want to do. Sometimes I don't want to eat. I don't want to take out extra time to eat. So sometimes I'm eating while looking at the work that I'm doing because it's a very, writing for me is almost a spiritual it's almost a spiritual thing. I think that I was given a gift. I don't think that this ability to write is something I did myself. But I've made the decision to use that gift and to use it actively and fiercely and gloriously. So really, my writing process is one of, it's almost obsessive. But in terms of the ability to get published, the thing about, so I often say to young people who are writing, if you get rejected, there are two reasons that you must consider equally. It's either it's not very good, and you have to be willing to consider that, or it's that it's not the right fit for whoever you've sent it to. Because people do different things, right? And so, Afia TV is the eye of the East. It's not the eye of the North. So if you're bringing things to Afia TV, it should somehow be about the East. And in some ways, publishing is like that. So this young girl, for example, I'm sure that in the next few years, the story might be different. But being published is not always easy. And I started out with many rejections from publishers when I wanted to publish my first novel. And I like to tell young people the story about my many rejections because it's important to say that when you start doing something, just because you get, 1 or 2 or 3 rejections is not the reason to stop. You have to keep trying. And I think for me, at that point, I remember at some point thinking, will it ever happen? But I kept trying. And then finally somebody said, yes.
So at a point you were saying Olembe.
Yes. But I never said Nandapuse. Yes.
Very, very important. So let's talk about Dream Count, your latest work. And people are receiving it across the world. But do you have maybe the kind of response people are giving to the book? Do you have maybe glimpses of what the reception is like in different parts of the world?
Yes. Well, I've been traveling. The book came out in March, and I've been traveling really since then. I've literally been on the road since March, going to different places, and I've fans are different culturally, and what they respond to in the novel often is different. So I found that my Nigerian fans don't have time for certain characters in Dream Count, while my American fans love some of the characters that my Nigerian fans just think, it's a waste of time. So there's a character in the novel called Chia. She's been the major character. And somebody on stage in Lagos called her a very silly girl. But the same character, when I was last in Brazil, and there are 2 women who came and hugged me and said, thank you, because you told our story. Chia is us. Thank you so much.
And nobody mentioned Chia yesterday. I think I was paying attention.
They probably all think she's a silly girl.
Because they kept mentioning the banker.
Yes.
I don't know. Well, so the responses vary from countries and cultures. Do you think that maybe it's like blind people feeling an elephant? Well, this is just a question of perception.
No, I don't. I think it's not so much blind people feeling an elephant as it is that I think we bring our own worldviews to characters, right? So I think 2 different people read the same novel and read it very differently. So I think that people respond to what they already value in some ways. And so Chia is a character, she's a dreamer, she's looking for pure love. And for many people, that's very impractical, that's very spoilt brat behavior. But for others, it's almost aspirational because there are people who are deeply romantic and who just think that love has to be this perfect dream. Right. So I think in general, we bring ourselves to what we read. So I've really noticed that people get attached to certain characters more than others. And often it depends on people's personalities, but also their culture.
I think that a lot of times people see themselves in these characters, and that informs their attachment or lack of it.
Yes. Because I think for us as human beings, we want validation. We're all kind of seeking. We want to be seen. So you read a novel and somehow you see a character who's thinking like you do, or who's experienced something that you experience. You attach yourself to the character.
All right. I don't know. I'm beginning to feel like one of the characters of the novel, and I'm almost forgetting the program.
There's a character who you might. Okay. I won't say anything.
I'll have to discover that. So, during your keynote yesterday, I noticed that you were quite specific, and you do not mince words about the sanctity of life and what has happened to that sanctity. the way our people go about money and things around it. Are you afraid that it might get worse?
Yes. Yes, I'm afraid that it might get worse, which is why I think it's very urgent. And to what you said about not mincing words, it's also important for us collectively to refuse to mince words because it's bad and it could get worse. And the problem with that is that it's bad for all of us. In some ways, it's that Igbo saying about one finger gets oil, the oil gets smeared on the others. So it doesn't matter whether or not you are actively involved in such things. It paints all of us in a very, very bad light, and for all kinds of reasons. And so it worries me very much. Igbo land has changed. People now have their wine carryings in Lagos and in Abuja. Not because that's their preference, but because they're terrified of coming back. And for me, it's a thing of not just sadness, but shame. Igbo land, and this is obviously a region, not just a region I love, but a region I have studied, right? I've been interested, so I've read a lot about our history, and this is not who we are, right? This is not who we are, this kind of senseless disregard for human life. So I do worry that it will get worse, yes.
What do you think are the triggers for all the atrocious things we're seeing around us?
Honestly, I've thought about this very often, and people will say life is hard, but life has been hard for many years, and Igbo people did not do this kind of thing. I think that there is a lot that maybe one can blame political activity for. I think that if you incite certain things politically, in some ways you can open a box and something sort of leaps out that you can't put back in the box, right? So I don't think that I know for sure. It's something that has really puzzled me, in addition to shock. And
so you think we have an Aladdin's lamp situation here? That forgotten that thing that
the genie
escaped from the lamp, and to get it back to the lamp is
so we have to fight. We have to catch that genie, tie the genie's arms, tie the legs, and put it back in the box. But yes, that is kind of the worry, because it's very difficult. It's much easier to start something than to end it. Something of the sort, because now you think about the people who've been incited. You think about the arms that have kind of spread around, and people who should not have access to those arms have them. So the cleaning up process is one that is very difficult, I think.
So what do you think that people should do here? Because it looks like we have two broad responders, the government and the people. Do you think that the people have a role here?
Yes.
Or you think the government should take the lead?
I think both, certainly both. I do have to say, I'm kind of, it's I think important to say that in Enugu State, security seems to have been something that's been taken seriously by the government. I think in general, it's not just about security, it's also about a mindset. So we now are a society. I remember when I was much younger, there was a man in our part of Anambra State who was very wealthy. But his fellow, the people in his village shunned him because they said, I am a rebegis. Igbo culture is one in which, in general, you get money. If people think it's not clean, they avoid you. Now we're celebrating successes whose origins we do not know. So I think one thing we can do as a people is, we can decide to focus on morality and integrity. We can say, if you have money and we think it's money that isn't clean, we're not going to celebrate you. And if that happens, then people have less of an incentive, because in the end, a lot of this is about people wanting this kind of, in my opinion, crass and empty glorification for themselves.
Egombute, that's what I call it.
Yes.
We call it different things. There's a ugite and different things. So you see 17-year-olds, 21-year-olds, they want to drive a Hummer Jeep, all the latest cars, but nobody wants to follow the process. Then one can trace your story from the purple hibiscus and up till dream cows.
Yes.
So you've had to bide your time.
Yes.
How important is it for young persons to understand the role of patience in their lives?
It's very important. And also, it's interesting, when you're 17 and you want to drive a Mercedes Jeep, what will you drive when you're 65? The thing of life is really about stages, and it's important to enjoy each stage of life that you're in. And at 17, or even at 21 or 25, Your focus should not be the accumulation of wealth. Your focus should be on making yourself better, acquiring knowledge, finishing your education, learning about yourself. I just think that our priorities have just become so distorted. But again, I don't think it's too late. But I also think that older people have a responsibility to be the grown-ups in the room. Adults should be adults. Seems to me that increasingly they're not doing their duties of speaking up, of showing young people the way in a very active way. Sometimes I even worry that older people are afraid of the young and afraid of speaking to them in a way that, to use your expression, doesn't mince words.
It's become a Herculean task correcting young words.
Yes, but it also is necessary.
So yeah, they'll just give you their box on the head and everything will reset. So let's get a bit national with this discussion. Do you like what you're seeing in the country currently?
No.
With everything?
No. There's nothing I like that I'm seeing in the country. Nationally, no.
So, but what disturbs you the most about Nigeria?
The suffering of the people. I think people are suffering much, much more today than 5 years ago, for example. I think that this government has, whether inadvertently or deliberately, but this government has been one in which people's suffering has drastically increased. There are people in the middle class who one would never in the past have expected to be in a position of begging, for help. And now they do. And to me, that's the most important political judgment you can make of any government. How is the ordinary person faring? How's the ordinary person faring and feeling? Because the psychological part is also important. If things are difficult, but people see good leadership and have hope for the future, it makes a difference. I don't think we have that, and this is a national problem. So that's what worries me the most.
You think Nigeria can have that?
Yes, of course we can have that with good leadership. Yes.
What does good leadership mean to you? I mean, what would be the trappings of good leadership?
It would be a leader who first of all believes himself to be accountable to the people, and who is transparent, who realizes that his or her power comes from the people, not from himself or herself. A person who is not corrupt, a person who doesn't need to be president. Because I think there's a kind of desperate grasping for power that many politicians in this country have. And it's because they're not going there because they have good ideas for society. They're going there because they want to have these positions in which they can accumulate power and money, really. So I think a good leader is one who has a sense of humility, and not a kind of performative humility, but a real deeply felt humility, but also confidence, because often I think that humility and confidence together will make a very good leader. Those are the things that matter to me.
All right. So let's talk about Igbo. There seems to be a disconnect between Igbo at home and in diaspora. You've lived abroad for quite some time. Is there a disconnect between, and what is causing this disconnect?
I don't think there is a disconnect.
You don't think?
I would argue not, no.
Okay. So when you look at the homeland Igbo land, does anything like that, and look at Igbos in diaspora, what do you think is the difference?
Well, actually, it's always true that Igbo people in diaspora can be very invested in Igbo land, often without a lot of knowledge. I mean, there are people who've been away for 25 years, but you hear them talking in the US, for example, about Igbo land. They're so passionate, but they're often kind of disconnected from the reality of what's happening. But it's not for lack of love. I think many Igbo people in diaspora are very interested, very concerned about Igbo land. Obviously, the difference is that Igbo people in Igbo land are living the reality of it. Igbo people in diaspora are looking at it from the outside. And of course, it can shape the way you think about ideas and also can shape the way you think about solutions. So I often joke about this, that Igbo people in America have all the solutions to all the problems in Igbo land.
Until they come home.
Yes.
So, but it's also true that Igbos in diaspora seem to be sending more money than any other person in diaspora in the country.
Yes.
You think that can be a game changer? Because so it's like arguing that they're sending the money, but in the way and manner the money is sent is affecting how it is used. They say most of the monies come in the form of domestic kind of processes for feeding money. That is this, my brother's that. It's not coming in form of investments. Do you think that this can change?
Yes, but I don't think that's the responsibility of the Igbos in diaspora. It's the responsibility of the governors of the Igbo states to create avenues for those investments, and also a certain level of a certain guarantee. And you need to know that you're putting money in something, and that your money is secure. Because Nigeria, I mean, and it's not just Igbo land. Nigeria is a very strange place. You might wake up and be told that your account has been frozen. You don't know why, and it takes you forever to unfreeze it. So I can see how the thinking around investment is a very good one, but I think that there's a responsibility on the state governments to create the enabling environment for people to invest. And there are people who want to. My feeling about Igbo people in diaspora, in general, Igbo people, we love Igbo land. We do. And we all collectively want it to be better. And some of that eagerness for it to be better comes from a feeling of wanting, even if just psychologically, the idea of a place to which we can run, right? A place to which we can, I think people who have a history of trauma always have that idea that we need succor. We need to know that there's somewhere just in case. So I think this love and this wanting Igbo land to do better comes partly from that, and that there are many people who would invest if the right environment was there. But also life is so hard that, we do need to send money to our cousins and uncles and aunties so they can eat.
That's right.
Because life is hard.
So I looked at a lot of the gifts you received yesterday, and I kept saying, are we going to see an Odelowa center anytime soon? Anywhere. You can be in a soccer in Enugu or even Aba. You never know.
Well, now that you mention it, no, I haven't thought about that. But it sounds like it's not an unappealing idea. I can already imagine the things that will be in it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so while I let that simmer is on site, we'll take a very short break. And when we come back, I'll still be asking Odelowa just a few questions before we wrap up the conversation here on the Eastern Eye. Stay with us. Back to the Eastern Eye here on Afia TV, a program that X-rays the political, social, and economic developments around us. I still have in the studio with me, Odelowa, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, renowned international author and feminist. I didn't add that in the beginning.
No, you did. And I don't need to have it added.
Okay, great. So let's talk about how you've progressed from Purple Hibiscus. I'm sure there are things you've learned from the first time you published your novel and now that you're counting your dreams. So what is that thing or those things that you have picked up in the last few years, maybe 10, 15, that you think that maybe if you had the opportunity of knowing those things before you published Purple Hibiscus, would you have done anything differently?
That's actually interesting. Would I have? Probably not, actually. Probably not. I mean, obviously, as I've, with the first novel and the second and the third, and of course with more readers, more of a reach, more, relative success, the publishing experience has been different. So now I started out with a very small publishing house with an editor who was very comfortable telling me to take out many things from the book. And now I'm with a very big publisher. And, I think one of the things, success can sometimes insulate you from truth. So if anything, I've learned to keep asking to be told the truth. I don't want to be told what I want to hear. I want to know what's true. So I have to now make a case for it, right? Because I have to say to people, the early readers, just tell me what's not good. Tell me why it's not good. The more successful you become, the more likely that people lie to you. And that lying is bad for you.
But is that the same thing where you are in political office? They tell you things that...
Actually, it's similar. Actually, it's very similar. Especially if you decide to surround yourself with people who just do not tell you the truth, who constantly praise you. And you find that many leaders do this. And so sometimes you're reading about a leader and you're thinking, but how can this person see? But actually it's because this person is surrounded by people who are saying to this person, you need to disregard reality. Let's give you another version of reality. So really, I think that's the one thing but it's not that I would change anything that I did with Purple Hibiscus, but it's that with increasing success, I have been very, very deliberate about remaining, about the walk remaining true, about not writing rubbish and telling myself that it's good,
So, Half of a Yellow Sun is a novel that a lot of people from Eastern Nigeria connect with. And nobody would need to ask why, because it looks like the Biafra War has become part of our history.
Yes.
An indelible part of our histories. When you wrote that novel, and after the novel received a lot of acclaim, how did you feel?
When I said as an Igbo woman, as an Igbo woman, I felt a sense of, honestly, I felt a sense of fulfillment because for so long, that period of our history has lived with me. And again, it feels almost spiritual. I felt that I had to write a book about that period, particularly for the younger generation. Many of us kind of knew Biafra, but we really didn't know what happened. And that book took a lot from me emotionally. I did a lot of research. I read everything.
It's so obvious.
I looked at archives. I went and listened to radio shows broadcast during the period because I needed to really immerse myself. But it also took a lot from me emotionally. I talked to my father a lot, endlessly. And so you talk to your father and your father tells you your grandfather died in a refugee camp. And then you look at photographs of a refugee camp and you see people there. It's no longer just research. It becomes a deeply personal thing. So when I finished that book, I remember just going into a very deep and dark depression, but also relief. And then I wasn't sure how it would be received because, when I was working on it, so many people had tried to dissuade me. Oh, don't bring it up. Just just leave it where it is, that kind of thing. People of all ages, older, my generation, everyone. Yes, I got very little encouragement when I would mention that I was working on a novel set in Biafra. People would get very uncomfortable.
And you gave it a very apt title, Half of a Yellow Sun. That's another way to say Biafra without saying Biafra.
Yeah, but no, it does have the flag. And so that idea that the sun rose, but only half of it, because there was a lot. And again, for me, that period was also, it's a learning, and I would love for young people to know more about, the first few, maybe even the first year, Biafra, the ingenuity of Igbo people, the passion, the willingness to sacrifice. You saw people who went out of their way to support the cause because they believed in it. This kind of, it's a very inspiring thing, something we can learn from. Lecturers in chemistry created a bomb because Biafra was so limited in what it had. And people who continue to believe in a cause, even in the face of a terrible and inhumane blockade. So, and that the book became, popular and widely read was very fulfilling for me. I wanted my generation of Nigerians to get a sense of what happened. But also in some senses, I wanted people outside of Nigeria. I mean, I heard so often from people when I was traveling for Half of a Yellow Sun, people who would say to me, oh, when we were growing up, we always had Biafra. And we were always told, finish your food. There are children starving in Biafra. But they never knew what Biafra was. So many people have told me this. And I think for many people also, it's giving them context for this country. If you understand the Nigeria-Biafra war, you will understand so much about Nigeria today, because there's so much that in some ways was a result of that war. I mean, even the question of states and creating states, the root of it is the aftermath of the war.
Absolutely. And it looks like state creation was also one of the catalysts for the conflict.
Yes.
Well, the war issues sort of gets Igbo very, very nostalgic each time you raise it. And each time you talk about it, people get emotional. So, but at the end of the day, Do you think that the Igbo will ever get over Biafra?
No, we should war. No, and we should not. We should not get over it in the sense of forgetting it. We can. It's us. It's part of us. I think every person has a story about that period, and for somebody like me, I never knew my grandfathers because they died. My father lost everything he owned, and so I grew up in a house that had furniture in my father's study that had been donated to him from his friends because everything he had was either burnt by the soldiers when they went into the Soka campus or stolen. So, you're a child and you see a shelf in your father's study that has an inscription of another name, Charles Brown. So it was his friends in the US that sent. They sent him hip shelves, they sent him books. So even as a child, that already shaped my perception of the world. So we cannot and we should not get over this period of our history. It is our history. We should own it.
So it's a Holocaust moment.
It is. It is.
Mm.
It is.
So Americanah was another novel. I found it very fascinating still. So at the end of the day, someone will say, okay, if you needed to know about America and a bit of the stories for someone who is in that place, is that the novel?
No, of course not. The novel is about middle-class Africans. The novel is about the experience of middle-class Africans who leave home not because they're fleeing conflict, which is often the stereotypical story of Africa, but because they want more. And often it's a thing that's not allowed Africans. We're supposed to talk about conflict and our village was burnt down and we had a military dictator. But often there is more. We also dream, right? And we also want more. So we're not starving, but we want more. As human beings throughout human history have wanted more. And so for me, Americanah is really about, I felt that there was a gap in the story that was told about Africans who leave. So there are many stories about, the Sudanese who are fleeing war and conflict, and those stories are important, but very little of the sort of, the middle-class African. The story that I know, that's what I was writing. I don't think it's a story about whoever told you that, tell them they don't know what they're talking about.
Okay. Well, that's a way to get you to explain it, and you did. So when Chimamanda isn't writing a novel or doing some of your tours across the world, what do you do? What do you do with your free time, Odelloa?
I read. Reading is the thing that gives me the greatest pleasure. Apart from writing, of course, and apart from being with the people I love. So it's not that I don't have many hobbies and things. I read. I love spending time with my family. It gives me joy. So really, I read. I read a lot. I read everything. I read.
So is another book in the offing?
I can't tell you that.
Yeah, I was expecting that.
I should say, no, in addition to reading, I'm actually a very good cook. But I only cook when I'm in a good mood.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I can understand that. And one would naturally hazard a guess that you will have to always be the good because the people who cook well will always want to show it us one way or the other.
No, but that would be a wrong assumption.
All right. This has been a very, very illuminating conversation with you, Odelloa, and I have to thank you so much for sparing this time with us here on the Eastern Eye on Afia TV, and thank you for coming home.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all you've done for yourself and for Ndibo.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. I appreciate that.